First time my mother-in-law told me I didn't belong in her kitchen. She said it with a smile. It was Christmas Eve, and the house smelled like butter, garlic, and judgment. I was standing at the counter, sleeves rolled up, carefully seasoning a pot of braised short ribs I'd been perfecting for years. My husband's entire family was gathered in the living room, wine glasses clinking, laughter drifting in waves. I thought I was contributing. I thought I was helping. Margaret Whitmore leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, pearls resting perfectly against her sweater. "We'll handle the cooking," she said lightly. "Why don't you go sit with the others, Claire?" Not Claire Whitmore. Just Claire. Her tone was gentle. Her meaning was not. Before I continue, take a second. If you've ever been made to feel small in someone else's house, especially by people who claim to be family, like this story, subscribe and stay with me. This isn't about food. It's about what happens when you're underestimated for too long. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped back, letting her take my place. The ribs stayed on the stove. Margaret never touched them again. Later that night they would dry. No one said a word. That was the pattern. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 29 years old that Christmas, married for 3 years to Daniel Whitmore, and working as a line cook at a mid-tier bistro in Portland, Oregon. I made $42,000 a year, worked double shifts, and spent my nights practicing techniques I couldn't yet afford to showcase. Cooking wasn't a hobby for me. It was discipline. It was memory. It was the one place my hands felt steady, even when everything else didn't. But to the Whitmores, it was cute. Daniel's younger sister, Emily Whitmore, once laughed and said, "It must be fun playing chef all day." Playing. Margaret ran a successful real estate office. Her husband, Richard Whitmore, had built his reputation on being practical and conservative. In their world, value was measured in contracts, not craft. Stability mattered more than skill. Image mattered more than effort. And I didn't fit. The comments were small at first. Harmless, even. "So when are you going to get a real job? You know restaurants fail all the time. Daniel deserves security." Daniel never contradicted them. He didn't agree either. He just stayed quiet. That silence became its own answer. The incident that shifted everything happened on a Sunday afternoon in early March. Margaret hosted a family brunch. Formal, planned, catered. I offered to help. She declined. Instead, she hired a private chef. I watched from the dining room as a stranger plated food I could have cooked blindfolded. Eggs overdone. Hollandaise broken. Presentation loud, but careless. Margaret beamed. "This is what professionals do," she said, glancing at me. Not rushed little restaurant food. Something tightened in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. This wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate. After brunch, while guests were still lingering, Margaret cleared her throat and said, "We have something to discuss, as a family." Daniel stiffened beside me. She looked directly at him. "We think it's time you start planning for the future. Real estate development, something stable. We can help." Then she turned to me. "And of course, Claire, this might mean some adjustments. Late nights in kitchens aren't ideal for a wife." The room went quiet. I felt dozens of eyes on me. Curious. Measuring. I smiled politely. I always did. "I love my work," I said calm. Margaret nodded like I'd confirmed something unfortunate. "That's sweet." That was the moment I understood. I wasn't just being dismissed. I was being managed. Over the next months, the pressure escalated. Subtle suggestions turned into plans discussed without me. Daniel mentioned switching careers more often. Margaret forwarded articles about financial security. Emily joked about how exhausting restaurant life must be. Then came the invitation, a summer charity gala hosted by the Whitmores. High profile. Fundraisers, donors, local press. Margaret called me personally. "We'd love for you to help with the food," she said. Behind the scenes, of course. I hesitated. "Who's the head chef?" "Oh, we hired someone," she replied quickly. "But you can assist. It'll be good experience." Assist. For free. For exposure. I said yes, anyway. That decision cost me more than pride. On the night of the gala, I worked 14 hours straight. Prepping, plating, fixing the steaks the hired chef ignored. Guests complimented the food non-stop. Margaret accepted every compliment. At the end of the night, she handed me a coat and said, You were very helpful. Helpful. Not talented. Not skilled. Helpful. 2 weeks later, I was laid off from the bistro due to budget cuts. My manager, Luis Hernandez, hugged me tightly and said, "You're better than this place." I believed him. The Whitmores didn't. Margaret offered me a position, part-time, at her office, filing paperwork. "Just until you figure things out," she said. That was the last straw. I declined. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Dinners became tense. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Daniel grew distant, overwhelmed by pressure he refused to confront. Then came the call. A local culinary competition was opening applications. High stakes, media coverage, real opportunity. I told Daniel first. He frowned. "Is this really the time?" I told Margaret next. She smiled thinly. "You're setting yourself up for disappointment." I submitted the application anyway. 3 days later, Margaret announced she'd invited the family to a weekend retreat, the same weekend as the competition. "That's unfortunate," she said, eyes fixed on me. "Family comes first." That night, lying awake beside a husband who wouldn't choose me, I realized something terrifying and clarifying. If I didn't act now, I would disappear quietly, and the next chapter of my life would be written by people who never believed I deserved one. Because the competition wasn't just about cooking, it was about whether I would finally stop asking for permission to exist. I didn't tell anyone I'd chosen the competition, not Daniel Whitmore, not Margaret Whitmore, not even my best friend Nina Caldwell, who'd listened to me vent for years about being treated like background noise. I told myself it wasn't secrecy. It was containment. Some things grow better without witnesses. The Pacific Northwest Rising Chef Competition was held every summer in Seattle. 12 finalists, 3 days, 1 winner. The prize wasn't just money. It was placement, media coverage, a 6-month residency at a nationally recognized restaurant group. For someone like me, it was oxygen. I submitted my application with a menu built around restraint. Seasonal ingredients, clean technique, no theatrics. Food that spoke quietly, but stayed with you. 2 weeks later, I got the email while standing in line at a temp agency. Subject, finalist confirmation. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the phone shaking in my hand, and read it again. And again. Finalist. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I went home and wrote a schedule. Practice hours, ingredient sourcing, knife work drills, flavor tests. I treated it like a job I couldn't afford to lose. Daniel noticed the change first. "You've been distant," he said one night as I chopped onions with mechanical precision. "I'm focused," I replied. He leaned against the counter. "On what?" "On myself." That answer made him uncomfortable. Margaret noticed next. At Sunday dinner, she watched me eat quietly. Observe more. Speak less. "You're very quiet lately, Claire," she said. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said. "Better than all right." Emily Whitmore smirked. "That's ominous." I didn't respond. Silence had become a tool. The weekend retreat Margaret planned loomed closer. She'd already booked the house. Already sent the itinerary. Wine tasting, networking brunch, golf. I told Daniel 3 days before the competition. "I'm not going," I said. He looked up from his phone. "Not going where?" "The retreat." He frowned. "Why?" "I have something important." He waited. "What?" "I'm competing." His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Competing in what?" "The Rising Chef Competition. In Seattle." The room went quiet. "That's the same weekend," he said slowly. "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair. "Claire, my parents." "I know," I said. "They'll be disappointed." "And me?" he asked. I met his eyes. "I need you to decide whether you're disappointed in me, or just uncomfortable standing next to me when I choose myself." That was the first time I'd ever put him in that position. He didn't answer. The competition began on a Friday morning. I took the train north with a single suitcase, my knives wrapped carefully in a towel. No fanfare. No good luck calls, just movement. The first day was technical. Knife cuts, timing, precision. The judges were exacting. They didn't smile. They didn't encourage. I thrived. The second day was creativity. Mystery box. Local seafood, root vegetables, unfamiliar herbs. I cooked with calm I didn't know I possessed. Halfway through plating, I caught my reflection in a stainless steel surface. Focused. Grounded. Unapologetic. I barely recognized myself. The third day was service. Pop-up restaurant. Paying guests. Real pressure. That morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Daniel told us where you are. I hope this is worth the disappointment you're causing. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I turned the phone off. Dinner service was chaos. Orders flying. Timers beeping. Mistakes everywhere. And then, clarity. I moved like water. Adjusted. Corrected. Delivered. At the end of the night, the judges gathered the finalists. They announced the winner. Last. Claire Bennett, the head judge said, nodding in my direction. Your food was precise, thoughtful, and confident. You understand restraint better than most chefs twice your age. Applause filled the room. I didn't smile. Not yet. The press interviews followed. Photos. Handshakes. Someone asked where I'd trained. Everywhere I could, I said. That night, alone in my hotel room, I finally let myself sit on the bed and breathe. I'd won, but winning wasn't the point. Choosing myself had been. When I returned home 2 days later, the house felt colder. Daniel was distant. Margaret didn't call. Emily posted photos from the retreat, smiling beside wine glasses, and captions about family values. At dinner that night, Daniel cleared his throat. My mother feels embarrassed, he said. I looked at him. Embarrassed of what? That you weren't there, he replied. People asked. And what did you tell them? I asked. He hesitated. That you're figuring things out. That was the moment something shifted permanently. Not with Margaret, with him. The following week, I got an offer. A sous chef position at a respected restaurant group in Seattle. The residency, I accepted. When I told Daniel, he stared at me like I'd spoken another language. You're moving? He asked. For 6 months, I said. Minimum. What about us? I thought carefully before answering. What about me? I asked instead. He didn't have an answer. Margaret called that evening. Her voice was calm, controlled. This is reckless, she said. You're destabilizing your marriage. I'm stabilizing myself, I replied. You're choosing ego over family. No, I said. I'm choosing dignity over approval. She went quiet. We won't support this, she said finally. I know, I replied. That's why it works. I hung up before she could respond. Seattle changed the way time felt. Days moved faster. Nights were quieter. The kitchen at Alder and Pine, where I started my residency, didn't care who my in-laws were or whether I'd missed a family retreat. It cared about execution, about consistency, about whether I could hold a station when the tickets stacked and the pressure spiked. I could. On my first day, the executive chef, Marcus Levin, shook my hand once and said, I don't care where you came from. I care how you move. Then he walked away. That was the entire orientation. I worked 12-hour shifts without complaint, learned their systems, studied their suppliers, watched how Marcus ran the line without raising his voice. Authority, I noticed, didn't need volume. By the end of the first week, I was trusted with proteins. By the end of the second, I was correcting plates before they left the pass. By the end of the first month, Marcus asked me to stay late. You're precise, he said, wiping down the counter beside me. Not flashy. That's rare. Thank you, I replied. Where are you going after this residency? He asked. I'm not sure, I said honestly. He nodded. Good. People who rush their next move usually regret it. Back in Portland, my absence created space, not silence. Space. Daniel Whitmore filled it poorly. He called at odd hours, asked vague questions, wanted reassurance without offering clarity. You sound different, he said once. I am, I replied. Margaret Whitmore didn't call at all. Instead, she acted. I found out through Daniel, who mentioned it casually one evening like it wasn't a strategic decision. My mom's helping me look at condos, he said. In Portland? I asked. Yes, he said. It makes sense long term. I paused. We own our place. Yes, he replied. But if you're going to be gone most of the year, he let the sentence trail off. That's not a decision you make without me, I said. I didn't make it, he said quickly. We're just looking. But the seed had been planted. Margaret followed up with an email. Subject: practical next steps. She outlined financial concerns, Stability. Perception. What it looked like when a wife chased passion instead of permanence. She CC'd Daniel. She didn't CC me by accident. It didn't respond. Silence, I was learning, was a refusal to play a rigged game. 2 weeks later, something else happened. A food blog published a short piece on the rising chef competition winners. My name was included. A photo from the event. A quote about restraint and confidence. Margaret shared it on Facebook with a caption. So proud of young people finding hobbies they enjoy. Hobbies. The words sat there. Public and intentional. I stared at the post longer than I should have. Not because it hurt. Because it clarified. She wasn't trying to stop me anymore. She was trying to shrink me. At Alder and Pine, the pressure increased. We hosted a private dinner for investors. High expectations. No room for error. Marcus put me on sauces. You're ready, he said simply. During service, a server miscommunicated an allergy. I caught it before the plate left the kitchen. Marcus noticed. After service, he nodded once. That's why you're here. That night, Nina Caldwell came up from Portland to see me. She'd been my anchor long before the Whitmores entered my life. You look lighter, she said, over noodles at a small place near my apartment. I feel clearer, I replied. She studied me. Daniel's not keeping up. No, I said. He's waiting for me to slow down. And are you going to? I shook my head. Then brace yourself, she said gently. People who benefit from your stillness don't applaud your movement. The real betrayal came quietly. Daniel visited Seattle one weekend. He brought flowers, cooked dinner, tried to recreate normal. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. My parents are worried, he said. I know, I replied. They think this is a phase, he continued. That you'll come back once you realize how unstable this industry is. I looked at him. And what do you think? He hesitated. Too long. I think, he said carefully, that you're talented. But talent doesn't always translate to a life. That sentence landed with precision. So what does? I asked. Balance, he said. Compromise. And who's compromising? I asked. He didn't answer. That night, while he slept, I checked our joint account. Margaret had transferred money into it. Labeled, family support. Daniel hadn't mentioned it. I felt something settle in my chest. Cold, clear. This wasn't concern. It was leverage. The next morning, I asked him directly. Did you ask your mother for money? I said. He looked uncomfortable. She offered, and you accepted. She was worried about us, he said. No, I replied. She was investing in influence. That's not fair, he snapped. It's accurate, I said. He stood up. You're becoming paranoid. No, I said calmly. I'm becoming observant. That weekend ended with him leaving early. The following Monday, Marcus pulled me aside. We're offering you a permanent position, he said. Sous chef. Full benefits. Competitive salary. My breath caught. When would it start? I asked. Immediately, he replied. If you want it. I said yes, without calling Daniel. That choice was deliberate. When I told him that night, his reaction was immediate. You didn't even discuss it with me, he said. I informed you, I replied. Discussion implies veto power. This isn't how marriage works, he said. No, I replied. This is how autonomy works. Margaret called within the hour. Her voice was sharp now, no warmth left. You are tearing this family apart, she said. I didn't tear anything, I replied. I stepped out of a box you built. If you take this job, she said, don't expect us to be here when you fail. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. That's the first honest thing you've said, I replied. I hung up. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. Contract signed. Knife roll on the counter. I wasn't afraid, but I knew. The next move from them wouldn't be subtle. The escalation didn't come as a confrontation. It came as paperwork. I found out on a Tuesday morning when the bank called to verify a signature. The woman on the line sounded polite. Routine. We just need confirmation for the refinance request on the Portland property, she said. I closed my eyes. There is no refinance request, I replied. There was a pause. Keyboard clicks. It was submitted last Friday, she said. Signed by Daniel Whitmore. Co-signer listed as Margaret Whitmore. My name was on the deed. Not the loan. The house had been purchased before our marriage, with my savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother. Daniel had moved in later. We'd refinanced once together, years ago, after the wedding, but this was new. I did not authorize this, I said evenly. I understand, the woman replied. That's why I'm calling. After I hung up, I sat still for a full minute, not panicking. Calculate, I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. I sent one text. Did you refinance the house without telling me? 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Yes, he wrote, temporarily. We needed liquidity. My mom said it was the smart move, my mom said. I didn't reply. I called a lawyer instead. Her name was Rebecca Monroe. A real estate attorney Nina Caldwell had recommended years ago, back when I'd joked about prenups and independence. Rebecca listened without interrupting. Then she said, they tried to leverage marital ambiguity. Can they do it? I asked. They can try, she replied. They already did. But it's reversible. How? By acting quickly and not emotionally, she said. Which you're doing. That afternoon, I drove back to Portland. I didn't warn Daniel. When I arrived at the house, his car was gone. Margaret's was in the driveway. She opened the door like she'd been waiting. Claire, she said coolly. You should have called. No, I replied. You should have stayed out of my property. Her lips tightened. We're protecting Daniel, she said. You're not here. You're unstable. This industry. I walked past her into the living room. Rebecca Monroe arrived 10 minutes later. Margaret stiffened when she saw her. This conversation will be recorded, Rebecca said calmly. And for the record, Mrs. Whitmore, you have no legal authority over this property. Margaret's composure cracked. We're family, she snapped. This is what families do. No, Rebecca replied. This is what people do when they mistake access for ownership. Daniel arrived halfway through the discussion, breathless. Clearly summoned. What's going on? He asked. I looked at him. You forged financial consent, I said. You tried to bind me to debt without disclosure. I didn't forge anything, he said defensively. The bank said it was fine. The bank said it was pending verification, Rebecca corrected, which failed. Margaret crossed her arms. You're overreacting. I turned to her. You tried to trap me, I said quietly. You assumed I wouldn't notice. Or wouldn't fight, she scoffed. You don't have the resources. That was the moment. Not when she insulted my work. Not when she dismissed my skill. When she misjudged my reach. Rebecca slid a document across the table. This is a notice of invalid authorization, she said. If you proceed, we'll file for financial misconduct. Daniel stared at the paper. You'd do that to me? He asked. I met his eyes. You already did it to me, I replied. Margaret stood abruptly. You're being vindictive, she said. All of this because you can't handle criticism. No, I said. All of this because you mistook my patience for permission. Silence followed. Daniel's voice was small. What do you want? I didn't raise my voice. I want my house protected, I said. My finances separated. And your mother removed from our marital decisions. Margaret laughed sharply. That won't happen, she said. It already is, Rebecca replied. That night, Daniel slept on the couch. I slept in the guest room. In the morning, I packed a bag. This is temporary, Daniel said, watching me zip the suitcase. For you, I replied. Not for me. I returned to Seattle the same day. At Alder and Pine, Marcus Levin noticed immediately. You're distracted, he said during prep. I handled something, I replied. He nodded once. Good. Now focus. I did. 2 weeks later, the refinance attempt was officially voided. Rebecca filed a protective order on my assets. Daniel's access was restricted. Margaret sent a letter, handwritten, accusatory, emotional. Instead, I did something else. I start every comment, every interference, every attempt to undermine my work or control my choices, dates, times, witnesses, not for revenge, for leverage. One evening after service, Marcus asked me to stay. I've been approached, he said, by a publisher. I blinked. About what? They're developing a chef-focused series, he said. Profiles, not competitions, careers. I said nothing. They asked about you, he continued. Specifically, something shifted in my chest. Why? I asked. Because you don't sell struggle, he said. You sell competence. I went home that night and sat on the floor with my knives laid out beside me. The Whitmores thought they could corner me. They thought they were wrong. And soon, they were going to realize just how visible I'd become. Visibility changes the temperature of a room. People who once spoke freely around you begin choosing their words. Invitations arrive with qualifiers. Compliments carry calculations. I felt it the first time my name appeared somewhere Daniel and Margaret couldn't control. The publisher Marcus Levin mentioned was called Northline Table. National circulation. Thoughtful profiles. No gimmicks. They focused on chefs whose work shaped culture quietly, without spectacle. The edit, "I'm not interested in your struggle," she said during our call. "I'm interested in how you make decisions under pressure." We scheduled the interview for a Monday morning before service. She watched me prep. Asked questions while I worked. Not once did she ask about my family. At the end, she said, "You don't cook to impress." "No," I replied. "I cook to be precise." The article ran 3 weeks later. It didn't mention my marriage. Or my in-laws. It mentioned my discipline. My palate. My refusal to overseason. It described me as controlled. Margaret Daniel called the same day. My mother. I was slicing fennel, focused on the blade. "Why?" "She thinks you're humiliating the family," he replied. "By acting like you did this alone." I paused. "I did," I said. Silence stretched. "You're changing," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. "And you're noticing because I stopped accommodating." That night, Margaret emailed again. This time, she CC'd people. Emily Whitmore. Richard Whitmore. A family friend who happened to work in hospitality finance. The subject line read, "Concern." She wrote about instability. About how success can distort priorities. About wives forgetting their role. She ended with a sentence that made something inside me go still. "We worry Claire is being influenced by people who don't have her best interests at heart." I forwarded the email to Rebecca Monroe. Then I archived it. At Alder and Pine, Marcus pulled me aside during lineup. "You're getting attention," he said. "Good attention." "I know," I replied. "You ready for the next step?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. "Because I won't offer it twice," he added. "What's the step?" I asked. "Lead," he said. "Not just your station. A team." That promotion came with responsibility and scrutiny. It also came with leverage. I accepted. The first thing I did was set boundaries. Clear expectations. No favoritism. No noise. The kitchen responded. Daniel visited again 2 weeks later. He looked smaller. Tired. We sat at a cafe near my apartment. Neutral ground. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "I did," I replied. He frowned. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said calmly. "I'm surviving it." He leaned forward. "My parents feel like you're punishing them." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not thinking about them." "That's the problem," he said. "No," I replied. "That's the solution." He sighed. "They want to talk." "I don't," I said. That answer ended the conversation. The retaliation came quietly, again. A rumor reached the restaurant through a vendor. Someone had suggested I was difficult. Hard to manage. Overambitious. Marcus shut it down immediately. "Who said that?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied. He nodded. "I do." The source traced back to someone Margaret knew. Someone who owed her a favor. That night, I added another entry to my file. Not emotional. Methodical. 2 days later, I received an email from a producer. A cooking series. Not reality. Documentary style. Focused on technique and leadership. They wanted me for an episode. I didn't respond right away. I called Nina Caldwell instead. "They're escalating," I told her. "They always do when they feel irrelevant," she said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to stop absorbing it," I replied. She smiled through the phone. "That's new." I agreed to the episode. Not because I wanted fame. Because I wanted record. The filming was discreet, respectful, focused on process, no drama. That absence spoke louder than any confrontation. When the episode aired, Margaret didn't call. Emily posted vague quotes about loyalty. Daniel went silent. Then, the letter arrived. From a law firm, representing Daniel, requesting mediation, division of assets, an acknowledgement that my choices had created irreconcilable differences. I read it once. Then, I laughed. Not out loud, internally. Because this wasn't retaliation anymore, it was retreat. I called Rebecca. "We proceed," I said. "Of course," she replied. "But on your terms." We filed first. The paperwork was clean, precise. No accusations, just facts, dates, transfers, Attempts at control. Margaret was mentioned only where legally relevant, nothing more. The mediation date was set. Thanksgiving week. Of course it was. That timing wasn't accidental. The irony wasn't lost on me. If you're still listening at this point, stay with me. Like this story if you recognize the moment when silence stops being safe. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens when composure becomes leverage. And ask yourself one thing quietly. What would you do if you stopped explaining your worth? Thanksgiving has a way of turning tension into tradition. The mediation was scheduled for the Monday before the holiday, in a neutral office downtown. Beige walls, water glasses untouched. A long table meant to feel balanced. It didn't. Daniel Whitmore arrived first, shoulders tight, eyes avoiding mine. His attorney, Thomas Keegan, followed with a legal pad already filled. Margaret Whitmore arrived last, composed, carrying a folder thick enough to look impressive. She didn't look at me, Rebecca Monroe did. She nodded once. Grounding. The mediator, Ellen Price, introduced herself and explained the rules. Speak one at a time. Focus on resolution. Avoid personal attacks. Margaret smiled like she'd never broken any of those rules in her life. Daniel spoke first. He talked about distance, about abandonment, about how my career had changed the marriage. He didn't mention the refinance attempt. He didn't mention the emails. He didn't mention the money. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I accepted a job, I said. I did not surrender my autonomy. Decisions were made about my property without my consent. Financial pressure was applied through family channels. I documented it. Margaret finally looked at me. That's a dramatic interpretation, she said. We were trying to help. Rebecca slid a document forward. This is a timeline, she said calmly, with dates, amounts, and correspondence. Margaret's smile tightened. The mediator flipped through the pages. Slowly. Mrs. Whitmore, Ellen Price said. Did you advise your son to refinance a property you do not own? Margaret crossed her arms. I advised him to be responsible. That wasn't the question, Ellen replied. Silence. Daniel shifted in his chair. My mother didn't mean. I did, Margaret said sharply. Because someone had to. That was the moment the room changed. Not explosive, revealing. Rebecca didn't react. She waited, Margaret continued, momentum carrying her. Claire was chasing attention, she said. From kitchens, from strangers. Someone had to anchor the family. The mediator wrote something down. Rebecca finally spoke. Mrs. Whitmore, she said. Are you aware that advising financial action without authority constitutes interference? Margaret scoffed. Interference in what? A marriage? In assets, Rebecca replied. Which are not communal under Oregon law. Without explicit consent. Margaret's eyes flicked to Thomas Keegan. He didn't look reassured. Daniel's voice wavered. This is getting out of hand. I met his eyes. It did a long time ago, I said. I'm just no longer absorbing it. The mediator cleared her throat. Based on what I'm seeing, Ellen Price said, I recommend immediate separation of assets and expedited dissolution. Daniel looked stunned. Margaret's face hardened. This is punitive, she said. No, Ellen replied. It's corrective. The session ended early. Outside, Margaret stopped me. You're doing this to hurt us, she said quietly. On a holiday. I looked at her. I didn't choose the date, I said. You did. She opened her mouth to respond. Rebecca stepped between us. Direct communication should go through counsel, she said evenly. Margaret turned away. That Thanksgiving, I stayed in Seattle. I worked a double shift by choice. The restaurant was busy. Families, tourists, noise. I found comfort in motion. After service, Marcus Levin handed me a glass of water. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Clear. He nodded. Good. We're opening a second concept. I blinked. When? Spring, he replied. I want you involved from the start. That invitation wasn't consolation. It was confidence. Daniel texted that night. We should talk. Not about lawyers. About us. I didn't respond. Instead, I added another note to my file. December brought distance and momentum. The divorce filings moved quickly. Daniel didn't contest much. He asked for what he thought was fair. Rebecca countered with documentation. Margaret tried to insert herself twice. Both times, she was shut out. Then came the email from a hospitality investor. He'd seen the episode, read the article. Heard about my leadership at Alder and Pine. He wanted to talk. We met for coffee. Neutral. Professional. He asked about my vision. My boundaries. My willingness to walk away from situations that compromised integrity. I answered honestly. At the end, he said, "I like that you don't negotiate with pressure." That was the point. The retaliation attempt came the following week. A blog post appeared. Anonymous. Questioning my professionalism. Suggesting personal issues affected my reliability. Marcus forwarded it to me. "I can have legal shut it down," he said. "No," I replied. "Let it sit." "Why?" he asked. "Because it won't stick," I said. "And because response gives it oxygen." The post disappeared. 2 days later. No apology. No explanation. Margaret didn't call. Emily unfriended me online. Daniel stopped texting. Silence settled. Not the anxious kind. The earned kind. On the last Friday before Christmas, Rebecca called. "The settlement is finalized," she said. "Assets protected. Clean separation." "Thank you," I replied. "You handled this well," she said. "Most people don't." "I didn't want to win," I said. "I wanted it to stop." She paused. "That's why it worked." That night, I walked home through cold air and city lights. I thought about the kitchen Margaret had claimed. I thought about the house she tried to leverage. I thought about how often I'd been told to be grateful for access instead of ownership. That chapter of my life closed without ceremony, but something else opened. Because the next step wasn't survival. It was authorship. Authorship is lonely. At first. Not because you're alone, but because you're no longer buffered by other people's expectations. There's no script to follow. No inherited rhythm. Every decision lands where you place it. After the settlement finalized, the silence around me became noticeable. Not empty. Uninterrupted. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to the restaurant. 1 bedroom, clean lines, no shared history in the walls. I sold the Portland house quietly, without announcement, without nostalgia. The equity went exactly where I wanted it to go. Freedom has a cost. I paid it willingly. At Alder and Pine, the new concept moved fast. Marcus Levin brought me into meetings with architects, suppliers, investors. I wasn't there as support. I was there as voice. The restaurant would be called Stillwater. Seasonal. Minimalist. Focused on technique and restraint. "It needs someone steady," Marcus said. "Someone who doesn't confuse ego with leadership." He looked directly at me when he said it. I didn't flinch. The hours grew longer, the stakes higher. But the work felt clean. Purposeful. Then the call came from Richard Whitmore, Daniel's father. He hadn't contacted me once during the divorce, not privately, not publicly. His absence had been strategic. "Claire," he said stiffly, "we should talk." "No," I replied. "You want to talk." Silence. "I think there have been misunderstandings," he said. "I don't," I replied. He cleared his throat. "Margaret is taking this very hard." I waited. "She feels excluded," he continued. "Disrespected." "That's accurate," I said calmly. His voice sharpened. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being finished." He exhaled sharply. "You don't have to punish us forever." "I'm not punishing anyone," I replied. "I'm not available." I ended the call. That conversation stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it hurt, because it revealed how deeply they believed access to me was permanent. At Stillwater, pressure mounted as opening day approached. We hired staff carefully. I interviewed every line cook myself. I didn't ask where they'd trained. I asked how they handled failure. One afternoon, a young cook named Rafael Ortega hesitated before answering. "I fix it," he said. Quietly, I hired him, on the spot. The media interest returned. Subtle at first, then persistent. A producer wanted to frame my story as a comeback. A woman rising after marital collapse. I declined. That narrative still centered someone else. Instead, I agreed to a piece focused on leadership transitions in modern kitchens. No personal details. No family references. The article ran anyway, and somehow, the family details leaked. Not for me. An anonymous source suggested I'd been difficult to live with. Career-obsessed. Uncompromising. The language was familiar. "Margaret." I didn't respond publicly. Privately, I forwarded the article to Rebecca Monroe. She replied with one line. "Do you want this handled Or documented. Documented, I wrote back. At Stillwater, the night before opening, Marcus and I stood in the empty dining room. Table set, lights low, everything ready. You good? He asked. Yes, I said. You nervous? He pressed. No, I replied. I'm aligned. He smiled. That's better. Opening night was full. Reservations booked out. Reviews cautious, but curious. The kitchen moved smoothly. I watched my team more than the plates. They held. 2 weeks later, Stillwater was listed in a regional dining guide. 1 month later, a national one. And then, the twist I hadn't anticipated. Daniel showed up, unannounced. He stood outside the restaurant after service, hands in his coat pockets, eyes tired. I just wanted to see it, he said. You have, I replied. It's impressive, he said quietly. I nodded. It works, he hesitated. I didn't think you'd rebuild this fast. I didn't rebuild, I said. I built, he swallowed. My mother, don't, I said gently. Don't bring her into this. He looked down. I should have stood up for you. Yes, I replied. You should have. There was nothing else to say. He nodded once and walked away. That was the closest thing to an apology I would get. And it was enough. The final confirmation came a week later. A cease and desist letter arrived at Margaret's address. Not from me. From the publication. They'd traced the anonymous source. They didn't appreciate manipulation. Margaret's voice was removed from the narrative. Permanently. No public fallout, just exclusion, the kind she feared most. Success doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly. In the way your shoulders stop bracing when you enter a room. In the way conversations pause, not because people doubt you, but because they're waiting. By winter's end, Stillwater had its rhythm. Not perfect. Alive. The staff trusted one another. Mistakes were corrected without drama. Plates left the pass with intention. That was my standard. One night after service, Rafael Ortega stayed behind to wipe down his station, even though it wasn't his turn. I watched from the doorway. You don't have to do that, I said. He shrugged. I like things clean. So do I replied. Leadership, I was learning, isn't about being seen. It's about being mirrored. The first real recognition came through numbers, not praise. Reservations stabilized at 85% capacity. Food costs stayed controlled. Staff turnover stayed low. Investors noticed that combination. The hospitality investor I'd met earlier reached out again. His name was Thomas Greer. Mid-50s, calm voice, no theatrics. I want to talk about something bigger, he said over coffee. I'm listening, I replied. Ownership, he said. Not for me. For you. I didn't answer immediately. I've seen talented chefs burn out, he continued. You don't confuse growth with exposure. That's rare. What are you proposing? I asked. A partnership, he said. You lead, I back. Quietly, I nodded. I'll think about it. At home, I didn't rush the decision. I laid out pros and risks like ingredients. Nothing hidden, nothing romanticized. This time, I wouldn't be managed into a corner. While Stillwater grew, the Whitmores faded into background noise. Margaret Whitmore tried once more. She sent a handwritten card. No apology, just a note about how families make mistakes, and forgiveness is strength. I read it once, then I shredded it. Not angrily, methodically. Daniel Whitmore didn't reach out again. I heard through Nina Caldwell that he'd moved closer to his parents, that he was working in property management, that he seemed relieved. Relief often comes when responsibility leaves. At Stillwater, the pressure shifted again. A well-known critic made a reservation under a false name. Everyone knew what that meant. The kitchen was calm. Service was clean. The review ran a week later. It wasn't glowing. It was precise. And that mattered more. I framed one sentence and hung it in my office. A kitchen led by restraint doesn't need to shout. That sentence wasn't about food. It was about me. The turning point came unexpectedly. Margaret showed up, not at my home, at the restaurant, midweek. Early. Quiet. She stood near the host stand, coat still on, eyes scanning the room like she was trying to recognize something she'd lost. I stepped out of the kitchen. Claire, she said, stiff. Margaret, I replied. We stood there. Measured. Contained. I wanted to see it, she said. Everyone's talking about it. I'm aware, I replied. She nodded. It's tasteful. I almost smiled. She lowered her voice. This didn't have to end the way it did. It didn't end, I said. It concluded. Her lips tightened. You've changed. Yes, I said. And you noticed when you lost influence. Her eyes flicked toward the dining room. You're very visible now. I met her gaze. That's what happens when your work stands on its own. She hesitated. I worry about you. I tilted my head slightly. No, you don't. She inhaled sharply. I don't understand why you shut us out. I didn't shut you out, I replied. I stopped letting you in. The difference settled between us. She left without another word. I returned to the kitchen and finished service. That night, as I closed my office door, I realized something important. I wasn't angry. I was done. A week later, Thomas Greer returned with paperwork. Clear terms, shared risk, no interference. I signed. This time, I kept my name on everything. Ownership changes how people approach you. They don't test your boundaries. They assume you have them. Stillwater became more than a restaurant. It became proof, not of revenge, of alignment. The final confirmation came through a phone call from Rebecca Monroe. I wanted you to know, she said. There have been no further attempts from your former in-laws. No legal noise. No indirect pressure. That's good, I replied. It means they've accepted something, she said. I knew what. They'd accepted they couldn't reach me anymore. If you're still listening, stay with me. Like this story if you recognize the moment when silence becomes strength. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when success stops being reactive and starts being intentional. Because the next chapter isn't about them. It's about what happens when you stop building in response to harm and start building for yourself. And that's a different kind of fire. Power reveals itself when you stop needing witnesses. By the time spring settled in, Stillwater no longer felt new. It felt established. The reservations didn't spike anymore. They held. The staff moved with confidence that didn't require supervision. Problems surfaced early and resolved quietly. That kind of stability attracts a different kind of attention, not fans, observers. The first inquiry came from a regional hospitality group interested in licensing the Stillwater concept. Not franchising, replicating principles, technique-driven menus, tight leadership structures, minimal ego. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. I asked questions. Who would control hiring? Who would own mistakes? Who would absorb risk when something failed? They weren't used to that. Thomas Greer watched the exchange closely during the meeting. You're not hungry, he said later. I'm deliberate, I replied. That distinction mattered. At the same time, something else began circulating. Quietly. Through people who didn't know they were carrying it. A narrative. That I'd been difficult. That my marriage ended because I prioritized ambition. That my success came at a personal cost I refused to acknowledge. It wasn't loud enough to challenge publicly. It was precise enough to notice. I knew the source without needing confirmation. Margaret Whitmore didn't have access to my life anymore. But she still had access to her voice. And she was using it, carefully. I didn't confront her. I confronted the structure that allowed her voice to linger. At a closed industry dinner, someone asked me directly, do you ever regret choosing work over family? The question wasn't curiosity. It was a test. I took a breath. I didn't choose work over family, I said evenly. I chose autonomy over control. The table went quiet. No one followed up. That answer traveled faster than any rumor. A week later, I was invited to speak at a leadership forum. Small, private, no press, just operators. I accepted. I didn't tell a story. I outlined systems. Decision-making under pressure. What happens when loyalty isn't mutual? Afterward, a woman approached me. Late 40s, sharp eyes, calm posture. My name is Lillian Park, she said. I run a culinary fund. We exchanged cards. Your restraint is rare, she said. And your boundaries are clear. I learned them the hard way, I replied. She smiled. Those are the ones that hold. That meeting changed the direction of my year. Not overnight. Gradually. While professional doors opened, something else closed. Daniel Whitmore sent a message. Short. Unpolished. I heard Mom went to your restaurant. I'm sorry if that caused problems. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, I replied, it didn't. That was all. No invitation. No reconciliation. Just fact. The retaliation I'd expected never arrived, not because they'd grown, because they'd been outpaced. Margaret's influence had always depended on proximity, on access, on the assumption that I would keep orbiting her approval. Once that ended, her voice lost friction. At Stillwater, we prepared for a seasonal menu shift. Lighter, sharper, more restraint. During a tasting, Rafael Ortega asked a question that made me pause. "How do you know when to stop adjusting?" he asked. "When the food stops asking for attention," I said. He nodded like he understood something beyond the plate. That was the moment I realized I was teaching without trying. The legal aftermath surfaced once more. Rebecca Monroe called. "There's been an inquiry," she said, informal, "about whether you intend to pursue further action against your former in-laws." "No," I replied. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You have grounds." "I know," I said. "I also have direction." She paused. "Understood." Letting go isn't passive, it's strategic. The most public moment arrived unexpectedly. Stillwater was shortlisted for a national award, one that couldn't be influenced. Blind judging. Clear criteria. The announcement went live on the Thursday morning. By Friday, my inbox was full. Requests, interviews, invitations. I declined most. I accepted one. A conversation, not a feature. I spoke about leadership, about kitchens, about the danger of mistaking endurance for loyalty. I didn't mention my ex-husband. I didn't mention his mother. I didn't need to. That absence spoke clearly. The award ceremony was held in New York. I went alone. When my name was called, the applause felt measured, professional, earned. I walked on stage, accepted the recognition, and said exactly one sentence. "Thank you for noticing the work." That was it. Back in Seattle, Stillwater held its ground. The day after the award, Margaret Whitmore tried one last maneuver. Not directly, through a mutual acquaintance. They suggested a public reconciliation would look generous, healing, good for everyone. I listened politely. Then I said, "I don't need closure that requires performance." That answer ended the conversation. If you're still with me at this point, pause here. Like this story if you've ever realized that success doesn't require vindication. Subscribe if you want to hear how restraint outlasts resentment. And consider this quietly. What would happen if you stopped explaining your choices to people who benefit from misunderstanding them? It was about final separation, not legal narrative. They no longer had a version of me they could access. And that made the final chapter unavoidable. Because the last thing left wasn't confrontation. It was legacy. Legacy isn't what people say about you. It's what continues to function when you step back. That realization arrived the morning I didn't go into Stillwater until noon, and nothing collapsed. The lunch service ran smoothly. Orders flowed. Rafael Ortega adjusted a sauce without asking. The new sous chef handled a supplier issue calmly, documented it, and moved on. No one needed me to prove anything. That was the point. I spent the morning at home, not resting, just thinking. Not about the Whitmores, not about Daniel. About structure. About how quickly success becomes fragile if it depends on a single person holding everything together. I'd seen that mistake up close. By early summer, Thomas Greer and Lillian Park were both pushing the same idea from different angles. Scale, not expansion for attention. Expansion for continuity. "What happens if you get sick?" Lillian asked over lunch. "Or bored?" "I build so it survives me," I replied. She smiled. "Good. Then let's talk." We didn't rush. We modeled scenarios, staffing ratios, vendor dependency, legal frameworks that protected creative control without freezing growth. This wasn't a deal made over ego. It was made over patience. At the same time, my personal life simplified further. The divorce paperwork finalized without ceremony. No contest, no appeals. Daniel Whitmore didn't fight for what he'd never built. The last document I signed carried no emotional weight. That surprised me. I thought there would be a moment, some internal marker. There wasn't. Just confirmation. Daniel sent a final message after the decree. "I hope you're happy." I read it once, then deleted it. Not because it was hostile, because it was irrelevant. At Stillwater, I began stepping back, deliberately. Not disappearing. Delegating. I stopped correcting everything. I let the team find their own rhythm. One night, after service, Raphael asked me something quietly. Are you leaving? No, I said. I'm making space. He nodded. That's different. Yes, I said. It is. The investment finalized in late July. 2 additional locations. Same principles, different cities. I retained creative authority. Operational autonomy. A board that couldn't overrule me without cause. This time, every line was clear. I signed without hesitation. When the announcement went out, the response was professional, respectful. No spectacle. Margaret Whitmore didn't respond. I knew she'd seen it. I also knew something else. For the first time, my success didn't provoke her. It bypassed her. That's the moment. Control ends. The last interaction came unexpectedly. I was attending a private tasting event when a woman approached me hesitantly. Claire? She asked. Yes, I replied. I'm a friend of Margaret's, she said. She talks about you often. I waited. She says she doesn't understand how things went so wrong, the woman continued. She feels like she lost you. I considered my answer carefully. She never had me, I said. She had access. She confused the two. The woman nodded slowly. I'll tell her, she said. I didn't correct her. Some messages aren't meant to arrive intact. As summer faded into fall, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't motivated by defiance anymore, not even quietly. The drive that had carried me through conflict softened into something steadier. Ownership. I cooked one afternoon. Marcus Levin visited Stillwater. He watched service from the back, arms crossed. Afterward, he smiled. You did it, he said. I did what? I asked. You made. I smiled back. That was always the goal. He grew. I know, I said. They confuse being needed with being valued. That distinction had cost me years. I wouldn't repeat it. The final realization came quietly. I was reviewing plans for the next location when I noticed I wasn't bracing for pushback. Not from investors. Not from staff. Not from family. Because none of them held leverage anymore. That kind of freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with absence. The absence of tension. Of rehearsal. Of justification. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. The work was good. The life was mine. And the people who once tried to shrink me had no mechanism left to reach me. Not with revenge fulfilled, but with systems in place that made revenge unnecessary. Because the strongest response to being underestimated isn't proving people wrong. It's building something they can't interfere with at all. Healing isn't a revelation. It's a series of ordinary mornings that stop feeling defensive. I noticed it the day I burned a sauce and didn't apologize to anyone for it. I fixed it, adjusted, moved on. No internal monologue about what it said about me. No reflex to explain. At Stillwater, the systems held. The new locations moved from planning to build out with fewer surprises than expected. When issues arose, they arrived early, labeled clearly, and resolved without theater. That's what clarity does. It removes drama from the process. Lillian Park visited the Seattle location one afternoon, walked the line, watched the team, asked precise questions. She didn't flatter. She assessed. You don't hover, she said. I don't need to, I replied. She nodded. That's trust. After she left, I sat in my office and realized something else had shifted. I wasn't tracking the Whitmores anymore, not even unconsciously. Their names no longer triggered a reaction. They had moved from category to context. Past, not present. Daniel Whitmore surfaced once more through a third party. A mutual acquaintance mentioned he'd started dating someone new. That he spoke about me with respect now. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not resentment, just confirmation. People often revise their understanding after they lose influence. It doesn't obligate you to listen. My mother visited from out of state in early fall. She'd stayed quiet throughout everything, choosing not to interfere, which had hurt at times, but ultimately preserved our relationship. We walked along the waterfront, coffee cooling in our hands. You seem settled, she said. I am, I replied. She hesitated. I worried you'd harden. I looked at her. I clarified. She smiled, relieved. That's better. We didn't talk about Daniel. Or Margaret. We talked about food. About places I wanted to visit. About how success feels different when it isn't borrowed from urgency. At Stillwater, A new cook struggled with confidence. Talented, but hesitant. Afraid of making mistakes. I recognized it immediately. I pulled her aside after service. "You don't," she nodded, eyes bright. "That's what mentorship looks like when it isn't transactional." The final legal loose end resolved itself quietly. Rebecca Monroe sent an update. "No for thank you," I replied. "You earned the quiet," she wrote back. As the year closed, invitations arrived that would have once felt like validation. Panels, features, awards dinners. I accepted selectively, declined without explanation. The word no had become neutral. "Juanita, you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Why? You've been—" I paused, surprised. "I didn't notice," I replied. He shrugged. "It's there." Later, alone in my apartment, I thought about that. Smiled. Now, it felt earned. The last piece of healing arrived unexpectedly. A note came from the private chef Margaret Whitmore had hired years earlier for that brunch. He'd seen my name somewhere, recognized it, reached out. He wrote about how uncomfortable he'd felt being used as a comparison. About how he'd admired my composure that day, even though he hadn't known the context. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. Not because it wasn't kind, because I didn't need to close the loop I hadn't opened. Healing, I was learning, isn't about revisiting every wound. It's about deciding which ones no longer require your attention. As winter approached again, Stillwater prepared for its anniversary. No celebration, just service. I worked the line that night, by choice. Not to prove anything. To remember where precision lives. As the last plate went out, I felt grounded, complete. The last chapter didn't announce itself. It arrived the way good endings usually do. Quietly, without asking for permission. On the morning of Stillwater's first anniversary, I woke before my alarm. No tension, no checklist running in my head, just awareness. The kind that settles in when your life finally belongs to you. I walked to the restaurant alone. The city was cool and clean, the sidewalk still damp from overnight rain. When I unlocked the door, the familiar scent of steel, wood, and citrus greeted me. Nothing dramatic, nothing fragile, just mine. The staff arrived on schedule. No speeches, no cake. We cooked. Service was smooth, focused. The kind of day you don't remember for excitement, but for correctness. That afternoon, Thomas Greer stopped by briefly. He didn't stay long. "You've built something that doesn't orbit you," he said. "That's rare." "It had to," I replied. "Otherwise it would have owned me back." He nodded and left. Later, as I sat in my office reviewing quarterly numbers, I realized something else had changed. I wasn't measuring my success against anyone anymore. Not Margaret Whitmore. Not Daniel Whitmore. Not the version of myself that once needed to be chosen. The comparisons had dissolved. That's when you know revenge has expired. In the early evening, I stepped back onto the line. Not because I was needed. Because I wanted to feel the rhythm one more time that day. Rafael Ortega caught my eye and grinned. "You good?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You?" "Solid," he replied. Solid was enough. After closing, I stayed behind alone. I wiped down my station slowly, deliberately. I thought about the Christmas Eve kitchen where I'd been dismissed with a smile. The brunch where my work was replaced. The house that had almost been taken. The marriage that had required my silence to function. None of it felt close anymore. Distance does that. I locked up and walked home under streetlights that no longer felt interrogative. Just present. At my apartment, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The city hummed. Somewhere below, laughter drifted upward. Life continuing without reference to me. That used to scare me. Now, it felt like freedom. I didn't feel victorious. I felt accurate. The Whitmores had lost nothing they hadn't already tried to own. Daniel had found relief in returning to a smaller life that fit him. Margaret had learned the limits of influence when it isn't consented to, and I had learned something sharper than ambition. That dignity doesn't come from being recognized. It comes from being unmovable. I didn't need to confront them again. I didn't need apologies that arrived too late to matter. I didn't need to perform forgiveness to prove I'd heal. Healing had already happened. It looked like systems that worked, like boundaries that didn't require defense, like a life that didn't flinch when someone tried to rewrite it. If you're listening to this story and you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, pause here, like the story if it resonated. Subscribe if you want more stories about quiet revenge, delayed justice, and choosing yourself without spectacle. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment about one boundary you stopped explaining, because the truth is simple. The best revenge isn't success. It isn't exposure. It isn't watching someone realize they were wrong. The best revenge is building a life where their opinion has no function. I didn't rise to prove them wrong. I rose because I finally stopped asking to be included. And that decision changed everything. This is where my story ends, not with applause, not with reconciliation, but with self-respect intact. And that, I've learned, is the one thing no one can ever take from you once you stop handing it over.